Soon after my son was born, I began to reflect on a story I'd heard many years before. It was a story about the power adults hold over children. The stories we tell them, and the stories, like this one, that they are never meant to hear. The 6th of April 1966 started just like any other day in the city of Melbourne. Then something very strange appeared in the sky above the suburb of Westall. It hasn't been explained to this day.
This boy come running in and say, Mr. Greenwood, there's these things in the sky, these things in the sky.
We looked up and we just saw this saucer type thing taking off.
It wasn't a plane, it wasn't a balloon, it was nothing like that.
A lot of the kids took off towards where it seemed to go.
All the students were just running all over the place, hysterical.
Westall High School as a teaching situation ceased.
My girlfriend and I sat on the fence, climbed the fence, the school boundary, and we were crying, thinking it was the end of the world.
This is a mystery story that has, as its setting, a school. And most of the players were school children. They had this extraordinary experience, which they then tried to share with adults. And a lot of them had a lot of trouble doing that. They were disbelieved, almost stigmatised.
I think, like a lot of other people, I just shut up about it because of the ridicule. And it was everybody. You know, you were a kid, you were making it up. So you just be quiet, and in your mind you just think, I know what I saw, and no one's ever going to shake me from that. I know what I saw.
I really felt for them as people who had this incredible experience, and yet they haven't been able to make sense of it. This is the biggest mass UFO sighting in Australia, yet it seems to have been suppressed, deliberately kept out of the public view. Like the witnesses, I want to find out why. Whatever material was created about this story has simply been buried. And yet, this memory has survived. And it only has to be slightly pricked, and it's like the floodgates open, and all the memories come rushing out.
I was precipitating various chemicals in order to make crystals, and I just happened to be looking out the window, thinking how to fudge my science report. What I saw directly south was something that I'd never seen before.
We were out playing sport on the oval. One of the kids yelled out, look up in the sky, you know, it's flying saucers. And I remember we all looked up, and it really was a flying saucer. I mean, from what you imagine, a flying saucer, it was a round silver disc, and it seemed to be very low over the school. And I remember kids screaming and running inside.
This student came in, was hysterical, leaned up against a sliding door, screaming, there's a flying saucer in the oval. And of course everybody started to head towards the door, and the teacher said, sit down, it's not recess yet. And a few minutes later the bell went off.
Everyone started moving, like a whole lot of zebras being terrified by crocodiles. I went where the herd went. Barbara Robbins was the chemistry teacher at the time. She just grabbed a camera and started clicking.
I went into the staff room. Because I knew I wouldn't have a chance to have a cup of tea any other time, I went to get a cup of tea. And then because I was a smoker, and this is something that has stayed with me for 42 years.
Yes.
I lit up a cigarette, and so I don't know how much I delayed before I went outside.
Everyone just took off out into the oval. In time to see it lifting off from the oval, it was probably, I don't know, 50 feet or more in the air at that stage.
I see Andrew Greenwood, the science teacher, coming towards me, and he said, "Did you see it? Did you see it?" And he pointed up in the air, and I said, "No, see what?" I have a very, very clear picture of him, and I remember almost exactly what he said. And he said it was up in the sky, it moved at incredible speeds, it hovered, it seemed to go away, and there seemed to be light planes. He thought Cessnas he thought they were actually checking it out from the urban airport, and they were circling around it.
Sort of stopped dead, and stopped dead in the air, and then it just sort of started descending straight down. And I'd say it got down about halfway up that gum tree or above the goalpost and sat there for a while, and then it just sort of lifted straight up and then just took straight off.
This thing went down behind the trees, then it came up. It was like it had become aware of these planes coming in, and it just went woof and just left them like they were standing still.
And then it went across to an area called the Grange, which was a bit of a pine plantation behind the school.
Because I walk around with the Westall story inside my head, as soon as I enter the landscape of Westall, out it comes like a three-dimensional children's storybook. It pops up out of the soil. It's like I've entered my favourite children's story. The Grange was a special place for Westall students. It's where they went on cross-country runs, but it's also where childhood games and hunting for lizards gave way to illicit smoking and steamy liaisons.
Going the wrong way now. Let's be back here.
This flying saucer thing came out of the blue like a bolt. It's intertwined with romping around down at the Grange, out of sight of the school authorities or their parents. It has that sense of being involved with something dangerous or clandestine, and they were part of it.
A lot of the kids took off towards where it seemed to go, and it disappeared down behind the trees. So we all got through this fence and ran towards where it had appeared to land.
Tanya and I and this other girl, we were over the fence. Tanya was in the lead and we ran towards where it was coming down. Tanya! I lost sight of Tanya. She was in front of me.
A couple of girls got there faster than me. I was a bit slow, and they'd actually passed out. And apparently it did land, because when we got there, there was a great big round patch of like flattened yellow, almost burnt, although I'm a bit sketchy on that. I can't remember if it was really burnt or whether it was just flattened, but it was sort of yellow and the grass was all flattened in a swirly sort of a pattern.
Before I got there, the disc came back up again, so I stopped chasing it.
We looked up and we just saw this saucer type thing taking off, and it seemed to turn side on and just disappear into thin air.
Well, what about your friend Tanya?
I believe she did see it on the ground.
She did see it on the ground?
So I was given to believe, yes. But I went back to school and Tanya went back to school and basically had gone all to pieces. There was definitely an ambulance on the oval, and I was told that she'd been taken away in the ambulance, and that was the last time I ever saw her.
Wow.
She was just gone and she never came back to school.
Tanya wasn't the only person who saw the craft on the ground. Before they headed over to the Grange, Victor Zakruzny says 2 objects landed in a grassy paddock where a street is now.
All the kids were hanging on the fence there. There's quite a few kids there. It's a high fence, and I got up to the top there, and all you could see is two discs, one there and one a bit further away, probably 3 metres apart. I could hear somebody in the background saying, "Stay away, don't jump the fence." And so I said, "Oh, bugger, I'm going over the fence." The craft probably would have been about there. And there was another one set back a bit on an angle, probably just about there. There's a few kids walking around there, and I was the only one on this side. I got up to it to want to touch it, and it was, well, you could feel heat about a metre away coming from it. It was pretty warm or hot, and within a minute or so, it just, both of them just lifted up at the same time, about this height. And I seen what, that was breathtaking watching that, and then it just gradually lifted up and then went off towards the pines. I did a rough sketch of it.
Wow, look at that. This is the view from underneath.
That's underneath. There's no seams, no joints, it's just smooth metal. Normally an aircraft has sheet metal, pipe rivets, or all that sort of stuff there. This looked like come out of a mould or something like that, or one smooth piece of metal. It was just incredible. It's just something like you see in the movies.
But this is more than just cinema. If we look at the possibilities for this story, they are extraordinary. We're talking about the possibility of life coming from another place and just appearing one day in their midst, and then leaving again and leaving everybody with so many questions, but with a new openness to the beyond. If I'd been at Westall on that day, I would like to have raced after that flying saucer and gotten so close to it, to have held it in my hands. But the adults at Westall High School saw it differently.
That afternoon, our principal called a special assembly and told us all not to talk about it.
All I know is the whole school was told off. The headmaster says, "All you kids are nuts. It's a weather balloon. Don't talk about it."
I was prepped to tell the students that what they'd seen didn't exist. We weren't allowed to leave the school, at least I wasn't. My job was to walk up and down the corridors and make sure that all students were in their rooms. I was walking back from the West End. There was confrontation between Mr. Sambleby, Barbara Robbins, and a man I'd never seen before. I thought it was a police uniform, but it was just dark blue. It was demanded that she hand over not the film, but the entire camera.
I was near the gate and the police had arrived.
There were journalists outside. The police are being called in to keep the journalists away.
We were told that we weren't allowed to speak to the media in school grounds. After school finished, there was a TV crew outside the school grounds, so we undertook an interview with them.
Everyone took off onto the oval.
Now, I can't remember whether it was a principal or a school representative that came out and ordered us to go home and the film crew to leave.
And I'd actually been giving an interview to Channel 9 and the policeman actually walked up to them and said, "Stop filming and you go back into the school ground." Okay, so that's what I did. I was 12 and a half years old.
Because I was a mischievous sort of person, I was always getting into trouble. I had detention for actually appearing on the show, and then I got detention again at a later date after my picture and story was in the Dandenong Journal. So I didn't go unpunished, but it was worth it.
I now had 2 new leads to follow, Channel 9 and the Dandenong Journal. I rang Channel 9 first. They searched for a flying saucer story, and there it was. Now all I have to do is find the can with the matching number. But oddly, there was nothing there. I was absolutely devastated, and nobody had any idea where it had gone.